show how to sweat these two copper fittings together. Sweating means using solder to connect these two pieces of copper so that water won't leak out. So the key to all this is making sure that the surface is clean. Without a clean surface, you don't get a good solder connection. Second thing to keep in mind is the amount of heat it's going to take to get the solder to flow. And if this were to be held, for instance, in this vise without this wood in place, a lot of the heat, when we heat this up, will flow right down the pipe into the vise. It prevents this from heating up sufficiently for there to be a good solder connection. Now, for safety's sake, you may want to wear some gloves. Of course, in a situation like this, you'll have turned the water off, but that doesn't mean that there won't still be water in the pipe. Now, if that's the case, then it's going to take a long time to heat the pipe up here sufficiently to melt the solder, because the water itself, in addition to the pipe, will act as a heat sink, and as you're heating this up, the heat will be drawn down the pipe and the water itself, and it will take a really long time to heat this up enough to get the solder to flow. It'll eventually happen. So if that's going on and it's possible for you to drain the water, then you want to try to do that before you actually do the soldering. Okay, so we're ready to clean the surface of the pipe that we're going to solder. I'd like to mention before we start that, when you cut the tubing, there are tools that you can buy, not very expensive, that will actually make a very nice cut for you like this. If you just choose to use a hacksaw, because copper is very soft and that's easy to do. But if you do it with a hacksaw, you'll probably be leaving a burr around the edge, so in that case, take a file and just gently file around the edges here so that the burr is removed. If there's an inner burr, you can also clean that out just by wrapping around like this, or if you have a rat tail file, that will do it, and that will allow the tubing to fit in. Okay, next comes the cleaning. So all you got to do is grab a piece of sandpaper like this, wrap it around the tube, and just wiggle around like this. And you should see when we're done a difference between where we've scratched up the surface and where we haven't. So see how that's nice and shiny and scratched up, and you want to scratch up enough to match the depth this is going to go into, because we're going to push it all the way in. Now you may be asking yourself, how do you clean the inside of this? For that, you want to go to your hardware store and just buy a little steel brush like this. It's made specifically for this kind of job. You'll find it right around where you get the copper tubing, and you just force it in and turn it a couple of times, and that will scratch up the inside of the surface and clean things up there. Okay, so we've cleaned the pieces of the pipe and we're ready to start our sweating process. Now the first thing you want to do is put some flux on the surface of the pipe. Again, you can buy this flux in the same department at your hardware store where you'll find the copper pipe. And it just looks like a little paste inside. Get yourself some kind of brush. I've got an old toothbrush here. Put a little bit on your toothbrush or whatever kind of brush you have, and then try to get it on the inside here of the elbow in this case. And then you do the same thing on your tubing that we're going to fit there. So I'll take just a tiny bit more and run it around the surface here. Don't want to get any dirt on there. Okay, and so we're ready now to sweat these two pieces together. So what we're going to do is push them in all the way, just like I did there. You can give it even a little twist to make sure that's happening. So we're ready to light up our heating source. I'm using a propane torch, which is probably one of the most common things to use in this process. Notice the flame, how pointed it is. It helps direct it. Doesn't have to be like that. There's other tips that will widen out where the flame's going to go, and that just tends to heat up the surface even faster. And hopefully just by putting my hand behind here you can see the blue tip. The hottest point is up at the tip of the flame, even a little bit beyond it. So you don't want to stick this right down in real close. Doesn't do anything better. So first of all, we're going to heat up as much of the surface as we can, just going a couple inches on each side. Come around, since I have the luxury here of going from both sides, I'm going to do that to make it happen faster. Go from underneath a little bit, up above. It's starting to turn color a little bit, which is a good sign. It shows that it's heating up. The little black that's coming there is actually the soldering flux that's charring. We don't really want to see a whole lot of that. And now we're ready to touch the solder to it, and there it is. The solder just immediately ran all around there. Capillary action will actually draw the solder inside. And we're good to go. We'll let it cool now because it's going to be warm for a while. You don't want to burn yourself. Okay, I want to show you that the solder actually did flow all the way around. So we'll take this off of here. And notice how it's coming on. I actually used even a little bit too much solder. You see how it's hung off at the bottom here, but it doesn't hurt anything. And you see how it actually flows all around by itself. And the capillary action should have sucked it all the way in. You might be concerned that it isn't really getting sucked in. So in a moment I'm going to heat this up again, pull this apart, and show you that actually we've got solder on both pieces inside. Yeah, get this nice and warm. And it should be, there we go, it's coming out. And you can see how the inside surface is completely covered with solder. And let me turn the inside of the elbow and you'll see that there's plenty of solder in there as well. There you go, that's how you sweat a pipe.